Today, I am chatting with Emma Ramsay, who is an HR lawyer who I have a lot of respect and admiration for. She is co-founder of Ramsay Patterson Law Partnership. And as a partnership, Ramsay Patterson really specializes in supporting purpose-driven organizations. So it's great to chat with you today, Emma, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally. Lovely to be here. That's kind.
You're welcome. So first question, I just thought we could just have a bit of an introduction. And what I'm wondering is, what is it for you that made you want to practice HR law with a specific focus on purpose-driven organizations? What is it about that feels so important to you?
It's quite an interesting question. That's immediately taken my mind back into the early stages of my career. I, having trained many years ago, back in the 80s, I trained very much as a traditional lawyer, and I realised that when I started coming to do employment law, which was still quite in its infancy then, it was really about the people. And I love that whole human interaction, connection, how people act, why they act the way they do. And I realized that you could achieve so much more if you could persuade employers and individuals to talk openly and candidly rather than blaming each other and then just going off to a tribunal. I started as a litigation lawyer and realized after a few cases that nobody really wins in the tribunal. And it would be so much better to be doing the preemptive stuff and getting it right before everybody falls out. And then, so once I became an employment lawyer, it became really just about adapting the law and making it work for people. So I think that perhaps answers your question.
It very much does. And it kind of leads me really nicely to what I really wanted to talk to you about today, because the law, I mean, we talked about, okay, what might we call this episode once we've had this conversation. I think we decided we'd have the conversation and then see. One of the options was, how does the law impact your company culture? Another option that I don't think I mentioned to you actually was like how to use the law to empower your people. And it feels like what you've just said kind of covers both of those things, because one of the reasons I was so delighted to be introduced to you and to get to know you better, and I've recommended you to a couple of my clients now, which is a real joy. But like one of the reasons I do appreciate what you do so much is that it feels like you don't hold the law too tightly, and that you have a perspective whereby, yes, obviously complying with the law is important and something that we should very much do. But there is a way of doing that that does impact your company culture, and it can impact your people really positively, because it creates the space for connections, you know, for the use of values to come in. It doesn't have to be, you know, we don't all have to end up in a tribunal. Not that, you know, okay, yeah, some cases in employment law do end up there, but a lot of the time, employment law is used in more of a day-to-day way, but it doesn't always support people, you know, doesn't always support us as human beings and our values and our growth. So how do you, like, what is your interpretation of the law that makes that more possible?
Well, perhaps it comes from a principle that we often say to clients, that it's human beings that bring cases about the way they feel. And it's not, and the law is just a hook to hang it on. So it's the way that people feel is really important going through a process, as well as the legal compliance. And sometimes if you just reach for the legal compliance and say, oh, here's a procedure that everybody follows, we'll be safe, you forget the fact that it's a human being and they may not like that. And as we were saying earlier, there's human beings come in every shape and size, and we're all very different, and we need to kind of respect that if we're going to manage the person through the process as well. I mean, it's interesting. So I was just thinking about that title, about how does the law influence your culture? And your culture is so much your people and the way you operate and what you are and how you make decisions. And the law comes from a different place. And law in general, I don't have a problem with the principles. It's brought some great things. Health and safety has been improved with legal regulation. Equality and diversity is improving. You know, we have fair dismissals. Why wouldn't a dismissal want to be fair? It's then, so the principles probably behind all these legal issues do fit well with human beings. They're how we want to interact in our businesses. The problem, I think, comes when with the steps you take to comply with those law. And I will, in my early career, admit that I'll be part of that, created systems and processes which became kind of tick boxes. And you thought, okay, if you had this system in place, and if I'd ticked all these boxes before I did that, I would be safe in this piece of litigation. But then you have a risk of the legal compliance driving the way you deal with things, and your culture and values can get lost. And that, on a human level and on a business level, I'd say, could be much more damaging. So we kind of set up our business because we believe that organizations that live their purpose and values in everything they do, including these tricky procedures, will thrive. And that's what we try to do, is to ensure they comply with the legal minimums, but at the same time really live their values and their purpose and their culture, and let that fly.
And could you maybe give us an example of that? Because one of the reasons that I recommended you to one of my clients earlier this year was related to their employment contracts. And there's this example of Tony's Chocaloni, which is quite a sort of famous, well-known example. That's maybe an extreme of what you can do with your employment contracts, of sort of making it very visual, still being compliant and getting the key messages across, but doing it in a way that people can really relate to, rather than in a way that you either, you know, you read it before you go to sleep because it will send you to sleep, it's so boring, or you kind of just don't even read it because the language is so draining and complex, so you just sign it, you don't even know what you've signed. What is possible with, you know, taking the employment contract, and how can a company use their employment contracts as like step one of this introduction into their brand, their culture, their values, you know, how they do things?
Oh, lots in there, Sally, lots.
Yeah, that was sort of, sorry, was that like 50 questions in one? Answer whichever aspect of it that you want.
I think, yeah, and it's a great example to use. But I just setting the context, I once heard of a client that used to send their employment contract with a tea bag and a bar of chocolate and say, sit down and have a read. So they kind of like gave it a pill. They almost giving their employee a pill to say, I know you've got to read this nasty thing, but let's try and make it as nice as possible.
Like having a sugar lump after a vaccine when you were a kid.
That's right. And when we heard that, we made us think, why do they have to be like that? They don't need to be like that. But I thought it was quite creative. But it's actually, could we just not make the document? Could we make the document less attractive? Tony's Chocaloni is kind of quite well known, and clients send it to me and say, this is what we'd like. And I think, it's a very appealing, a visually appealing option. And I always say to clients, you've got to turn it around. You must first of all start with, what is the purpose of your contract? And it's everything we do. And I mean, that's our approach. Let's first of all work out what you're trying to achieve, and then we'll step and think about how we do it. So I don't know the thinking behind the Tony's Chocaloni contract, but the principles are, what are you trying to do with your contract? Are you trying to engage your people, explain or set the culture, address particular issues that you think they need to be clear about? Are you just trying to achieve clarity so that the person who accepts the offer of employment absolutely knows what they're coming to? That's one way of approaching a contract. Another might be, I want complete control. I want to make sure that when I take this person into my business, I know they can't go anywhere, they can't take my information. I don't want them working anywhere else. I want to make them work whatever hours, whenever I choose. I want control. Perfectly legitimate position to be, but you need to be clear what it is you want. It might just be, I really don't want a contract, I just need to meet my legal obligations. And there are a minimum list of things that need to go in a contract in the UK, and they can be light touch or they can be comprehensive. But your decision on which way you go should be driven by what you're trying to achieve first. So if you want to achieve a really engaging, enthusiastic employee, but you also need to cover everything and be controlled, then we would really look at explaining the obligations in plain English, having your values and your culture running clearly through the document, and how would you deal with disciplinaries and grievances, for example. There's always a clause that just says, if you do something wrong, we'll discipline you and here's the procedure, and if you've got a problem, here's the grievance procedure. That's fine, but could you state that more creatively? Could you state that more humanly? And so I sometimes get excited. I'd love to have the Tony's Chocaloni instruction, the real visual one. There's a company in Australia called Oricon that have actually put their contracts into comic book form. And I've listened to the legal professor who helped the lawyers pull it together at the time. And again, they started with what they wanted to achieve. And they had particular problems with people understanding confidentiality and time recording, I seem to recall. And so they just wanted to make sure the contracts were really understood. And they've created them into a comic book with images, and the employee is a light bulb, which I think is a lovely image for joining your organisation. So you can do anything on the scale of these things, and it's how creative you want to be, what you want to achieve with it. It's sometimes you need to be quite detailed because your investors require you to be, but you can still do that in human language. I do know a couple of people who turned down jobs when they got their employment contracts because they'd been sold this lovely, great culture, human approach, vision of working at this company, and then they were sent a very traditional employment contract with giving control entirely to the employer, not reflecting the discussions that have taken place, and we're just told, that's the law bit, we can't do anything about that. Well,
don't worry about that.
But you can, and if it matters to you as an organization to have people come on board with clarity about what's expected and goodwill, I think the contract, it's the first formal communication you have with your people. So I think it's a really important place to start, and a lot can be done with it.
It's something that has the capacity to just set a very different tone, and yet the sort of the narrative, the kind of conditioning, I guess, around so much to do with the law is like, oh well, that's just a compliance thing, just sign it, don't worry about it. And why I sort of respect what you and your partner Ramsay Patterson, what you're doing, is because you are opening the possibility to change that narrative and to say, look, the law is the law, but let's really consider how it shows up in our organization, how it does impact our culture, and let's take steps to kind of engage with it in a way that supports our culture and our people, rather than something that is kind of actively working against it. So what you're saying is, it is perfectly possible to create legally compliant documents, contracts, and processes that are more human, engaging, and a lighter touch.
Absolutely. It will so revolve around what you want to achieve and what your attitude is. There is a real move to rethink contracts more generally, wider than just in the employment field where I'm interested. There's a real move to say, why are we prescribing in this partnership deal or this commercial contract, why are we prescribing everything that might happen in 10 or 15 years? So that in 15 years time we can come back and say, oh, 15 years ago you promised this, when actually everything's evolved and moved. And actually, should we be creating contracts that enable people to evolve, and you have systems in place to resolve conflict at a later stage, rather than prescribing what the solution will be at the outset?
There's is it called conscious contracting?
Yes, conscious contracts.
That is just, this is another thing that you're just introducing to me, which is just like absolute music to my ears. And I think it's something, like, I've been in this space of sort of purposeful organizations, reinventing organizations, self-management, all of that stuff for a number of years now. And there's been such a sort of a need and a desire to find lawyers and to sort of have the legal support for a more human approach. And I feel like what you're saying to me is like, it's happening. It's happening, it's coming. Like, you know, in the legal profession, we are talking about conscious contracts. We are thinking about intent and not just sort of layering so much that it kills off what makes us human and our ability to kind of learn and resolve things.
It's absolutely there, Sally. There's a network of people and connections with different skills and abilities doing it. And there's a whole thing to rethink our corporate structures too. And how do we, what are we in business for, and our purpose? So it's all around that theme, that there are legal rules and regulations, but it's how you interpret them in your business. That's not how you interpret complying with the law, but it's how you interpret living it in your business. And it doesn't have to be one size fits all. Just needs a little bit of thought and creativity sometimes.
I think, as much as I think it's going to be music to the ears of various employees, I think this is just music to the ears of so many founders, particularly in small businesses, who have kind of set up their business because they want to engage differently. They want to create a culture and a space that really speaks to them and to the purpose of why their business exists. And I think for people like that, the law has also just been this thing like, oh, okay, let's kind of grit our teeth and do what we need to do.
And that is where a lot of the problems come from. So if you are in that environment that you're describing, one that's trying to be different, is equal, is respectful, and there's a problem, and you're given a standard disciplinary or grievance procedure that doesn't enable you to deal with it in the human way that you'd like to, it's immediately off-putting and conflicting.
It kind of jars even more, right, against the culture.
So you don't want to do it because you're not being empowered to be yourself. Particularly dealing with performance issues, because if you're working with people you like and you've got a team you value, and there is a little niggling thing, but you're moving in the right direction, the last thing you want to do is to damage that relationship by hitting it with a sledgehammer. You want to be able to have an open conversation, and if you feel you can have an open and good conversation that is still legally compliant, then you're going to do it, because it enables you to be the person you are. And
it sends such a message as well that no, really, we really do live these values. No, like, we really do want connection and empowerment and autonomy. Like, it's so powerful. I almost think I might regret saying this. I almost think it is the most powerful, like, thing that you can do, because mainly because if you don't do it, it is so jarring, and it works against what you're saying so much.
And it's just really important to do it, because particularly in organizations that are trying to create that culture, because it can be so damaging if you don't make that little bit of effort to get the right system in place. And even if you haven't got the systems and you've come across a problem, it's still worth thinking about how you're going to do it, and not just looking for some kind of template, because actually the ACAS rules and the procedures, then there are rules and procedures that need to be followed, but they're not that prescriptive.
Yeah.
If you look at them from a different eye, if you look at them from a, how do I make this work in my organisation, then you can still do quite a lot, even from a kind of standing start. So it's just really worth thinking widely about, because that's how people thrive, isn't it? When people are happy, when people understand, when they know what's expected of them, they thrive, and then your organisation thrives, and your managers are able to deal with things. It's such a win that's kind of the belief that drives our business. We just think you can have such an impact from really living your values and your purpose, and being clear about it, and inspiring your people.
Speaking of living your values, I think it was last time that we spoke, you told me about a primary school in South London called the Surrey Square Primary School, and they pretty much abolished school rules. And instead of having school rules, they really lean into their values. And as a case study, particularly because it involves children, I just think, yeah, if this works in that setting, then what are we waiting for in business? Can you tell us a little bit more about Surrey Square?
I can tell you a little more about Surrey Square, but the thing that inspired me to talk to you about it was in the context of our distance. If we like just sit it back to what we do in business, like we have a disciplinary procedure, and we set out in there everything that they mustn't do and what will happen to them if they do it. And then I go, so that's dealing with adults. Here are all the rules and you mustn't do it. And there's no talk about values or why we're here or what it's all about. And then I go and visit Surrey Square Primary School, and I'm immersed in this primary school that is making extraordinary strides forward by getting rid of school rules and introducing their values from reception right the way through to, I don't know, it was 10 or 11 where they finished. It's a very small catchment school, so a lot of high rise. It's like 200 meters is their catchment, because there are a lot of high rise buildings and there are a lot of refugees. They've got a lot of issues, practical, everyday, real issues to deal with, and they bound everyone together around their values. And everything is that their achievement in school, the way they interact with their teachers, everything is managed against their values. And I saw an example of this when a 10-year-old boy was showing me around the school, and we were coming down one of those windy staircases, and he was sliding on his bottom round the spiral. It just looked like such fun. And I said to him something like, I suppose if there are no school rules, you can slide on the banisters. Because, you know, Sally and you and I were not allowed to run around at school. It was a kind of rule. And he jumped off the banister, and he thought for a moment, and he said, no, I shouldn't be doing that. I said, but there are no rules. You can do what you like. And he said, no, it's not responsible. I might fall off. I might hurt myself. I might hurt somebody else. And I thought, if only adults in organizations could be trusted and inspired to form their own judgments about what's right or wrong around the values and purpose of an organization, how a better culture we'd have. So that's then triggered me to thinking, really, disciplinary procedures should be about what we want. They should be built around the values and the culture and what we want to achieve, while at the same time meeting the compliance obligations. But the whole tone and message of a procedure could inspire organizations to truly live their values.
Yeah. What do you think the barriers are to us doing that? Because I mean, in business, there are a handful of examples. W.L. Gore is one of them. American-based company. It was started in the 50s, so it's been around for ages, and they also have a really strong values-led system where they don't then have to prescribe, oh, you know, this is your limit for expenses, this is how we do, you know, because the values kind of say it all. And if you're living your values, you're going to make sensible, smart, valuable, you know, responsible choices, so you don't have to rely on the rules. So there are examples of this. But why do you think that we're not doing more of that? What is it about rules that are so attractive or so ingrained?
I think this is kind of one of the things that we've created out of the whole fair dismissal process, and the ACAS guidance on disciplinary rules and procedures, and they give you an option of a template, and it's all written. And I think they were all designed in a way for fair dismissal process where they were designed to make it clear to employees what might lose them their employment, because it's not fair to just suddenly come out of the background and say that was wrong, you're now on a warning, or you're now dismissed. We created these handbooks, these systems, these rules, the processes that said, hey, employee, read this 20-page document, and then you'll know everything you're not allowed to do in this organization. So if you do it and we discipline you, we're fine. Everyone knows what was expected. And for a lot of organizations, that might be, it's a kind of a safe place. It feels like we've written the rules, we have a safe place. And so driven from there, I don't think many people have paused and thought about what the impact is in terms of actually what do we want people to do. Yeah. And then it becomes a bit like, well, ACAS says do it this way. Well, there are some ACAS requirements. We don't have to do it quite like that. You could twist it around and set the values. So I think that's where it's come from. And then it does also require a huge level of trust and understanding.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like chicken and egg, isn't it? So you have to start trusting people. And once you start trusting them, they should step up to the plate. There'll be some who won't, that you'll need to deal with, but then you need to deal with them
regardless.
You need to deal with them regardless, and you need to maintain your values in the process of doing it, and not suddenly bin the values because we're now reaching for that old set of rules. So I think it's about trust and about communication and how you actually show up. There is I can't remember the name of the organisation, but it's in the health services. I've heard, I can't remember the details, but they have taken a whole different approach to issues that go wrong in the workplace. So instead of saying this incident happened, who's at fault, who did something wrong, and shall we discipline them, or what are we going to do about it? They start absolutely by looking at what's happened without judgment. And so you then start by saying, well, this is what's happened, and then you talk about what's the impact it's had, and why is or isn't that okay. So that's where your values or your rules or whatever it is comes in. That's why. Then you think about what you're going to do about it.
Yeah.
And too often we start the other end, and if we start the other end with our people by saying you broke that rule, hang on a minute, that's the wrong way around. You don't even know what was going on or whether I broke a rule or not. We need to change our language. So it's a combination of all of those things, of us stepping back and saying, actually, let's really understand what's happened before we even just think about what we want. So if we could do that, we could have procedures and contracts that promote living the values and positive approaches. With you have to have boundaries, but that's the self-managing thing, isn't it? You have to have the skill, the boundary, and the opportunity to do it. So you need those boundaries still, but then let people be.
It reminds me, I've just added, I've been sort of working in the background for a little while on a set of values that really motivate and inspire me in my work, and I've just posted them onto my website, and one of them is to develop connections even over making assumptions. And I feel like that it really aligns with exactly what you've just said. It's almost like all of these sort of legal processes take away the possibility for us to just be curious and to develop the connections. And I'm being a bit extreme there because presumably in a procedure, in a process, there is an investigation period. There's opportunities for different people to say different things, but once you're kind of in that structure and that process of it, it kind of sucks the life out of it.
Yes.
And so
really well put. That is really well put. It sucks the life out, and that's about the human being. How do you feel? Do you feel like this thing's been done to you?
Yes.
Or do you think you're part of the conversation trying to find out what's happening? I love that development of connection beyond assumption. It kind of sums up so much of what organizations need to be doing.
And just sort of as we kind of wrap up this conversation, the thing that I'm really kind of struck by, and actually there was a really great article that I read on LinkedIn recently. I love it so much, it's going to feature in my next newsletter that I'm going to put out, but it's from a founder of a company, and the title of the article is there an app for empowerment? And he's kind of just sort of grappling in the article with, we're used to things like to be able to kind of almost buy in a fix for things, like where's the app for this, where's the tool that's just going to do this, do that. And the whole point of the article is actually that empowerment. And I think also what you said about trust and understanding, there is no app for that, it's a journey. And it's something that you have to be aware of and commit to, and have the sort of the courage and the intention to walk that path. I also just sort of coming back to the primary school example, and why is it so difficult for us to lean into our values and be less reliant on rules? Well, I bet that nobody watching this will have gone to Surrey Square Primary School. We all went to schools where there were rules. And so actually, so there's also, as much as, yes, the law has probably, I was going to say interfered, that's the wrong word, where the law has influenced,
Yes.
that also our own conditioning and our own experiences also tells us that rules are how you create order, compliance. And so it's even more important to kind of be aware of that conditioning and that sort of subconscious reliance, and start the journey towards saying, okay, actually there are other ways of doing this. And what I'm hearing you saying is that you can still do that in a compliant way, and you can still do that in a way that feels safe enough that if a major issue does come up, you can still resolve it. You're not just going to create a free-for-all.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to pause and describe what you want to achieve, because lots of people want the Tony's Chocaloni contract. But actually you need to create what's right for you as an organization, and you as its manager, your people, how you feel, your aptitude for risk, and all of those things.
It has to align, else it's not going to feel authentic. Exactly that. Oh, Emma, this has been such a good conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and I meant what I said at the start. I have so much respect and admiration. I'm so happy that we were introduced, which I think was around about January or something of this year. It's such a pleasure to hear your attitude to the law, how you work with your clients, the importance of defining your own unique intention within your business. So thank you so much.
Well, it's a pleasure as always, Sally. We have really good chat, and it's been a delight to meet you, and I've really enjoyed it. And it's just so exciting to know that you and people like you are in organizations actually helping them on the ground to do that. I'm a little bit on the side saying this is an idea. Doing it is challenging, and it's together hopefully we can really help organizations thrive, and with the ripple effect that has, it's just really good to be connected with you. And thank you for this.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure, and no doubt I will talk to you soon.
Bye.